we're actually probably like live before it even tells me. And
Great.
then I think we're actually live, but it's still telling me we're just setting up, setting up, setting up. There we go. All right, awesome. Thank you so, so much, Caroline, for coming live and chatting with us about your epic, epic adventure that I think, as I just told you, is the coolest thing I've ever heard. I would love to do something like that one day. And then you have a new book out, which is really, really exciting. So I'm excited to talk to you more about that. So
Thanks.
so just to start us
Here.
off with this interview, how about you give us a little introduction to yourself?
Sure. Yeah. So I am based in Alaska, and I've actually been here my whole life, more or less, with some forays to other places. And I'm a writer and a wildlife biologist and an adventurer whenever I get the chance, and also a mom to two little boys who are 3 and 5 now.
Love it. So, people get inspired to make travel a large part of their life for many different reasons. For you, it was the idea that your day job might dim your passions. So, can you just share what was going through your mind at this time and how you reached your ultimate decision to go on this epic long adventure?
Yeah, I think it was a combination of sort of lifelong building up to this place. And also, as you said, I was at this transition point. So I was just finishing up my PhD in biology, which I had first started because I was so passionate about the natural world and about birds in particular. And as many things turn out, not exactly as planned, I was finding myself more and more stuck in a lab, slicing up little pieces of bird beaks, which is a whole nother story, and looking at them through a microscope and kind of questioning what I wanted professionally and if science was really it. And I was also at a transition point personally. My dad had recently been diagnosed with Parkinson's disease, which is a degenerative neurologic disease I'm sure many people are familiar with. And my younger sister was pregnant with her first child, and Pat and I had considered starting a family, but we weren't quite sure when and how and if. So I think it was definitely a transition point in a lot of different ways. And going out and spending 6 months in the wilderness is maybe not the most logical response to uncertainty, but for me, it turned out to be really the perfect answer to not knowing what was coming next.
Yeah. And I think too, like sometimes people might not even know that's what they need. And then it ends up um, just being something they never expected. Like we were kind of saying before we came live, like things just work out in these ways that you never would have expected, which is really cool.
Yeah, very true. And that was certainly the case with our trip. The things that I walked away with weren't necessarily what I had gone into it expecting or even knowing enough to hope for.
Yeah. And I think too, what you were saying touches on the idea that like people are always waiting for that perfect time for everything to just align up perfectly. I mean, not just for travel, for like everything in life, like buying a house, having kids, all that stuff. But when is it ever going to be perfect? Like there's always something happening. So sometimes you just, I guess, got to do it.
Yeah, absolutely. And that was true at that time for us too, that I was frantically trying to write my dissertation. My husband, Pat, who is my partner in this, was trying to finish up a couple of house remodels, which is what he does professionally. We had a million things going on, and it never seemed like a good time to go. And I experienced that again and again in subsequent trips, whether with kids or without kids, that it's always that sense of how can we possibly go now, because what will we be leaving behind, and there's just too much to do and all of that. But in reality, if you don't go, you never will, and don't know what you're missing out on. So
yeah, you can always find a reason like not to do it.
yeah.
Though the trip you embarked on was definitely unique. So you decided to embark on a 6-month human-powered 4,000-mile expedition from the Pacific rainforest to the Arctic coast with your husband, Pat, covering some extremely rugged and remote places by foot, raft, canoe, and even a homemade rowboat. Quite a challenging trip. So how did you decide on this trip specifically?
I think it was a combination of looking at the map and dreaming. And we've always kind of operated on taking on what seems barely possible and pushing the limits of that. And this trip certainly offered that opportunity to figure out what was possible and if we were capable of it. At the route itself, we came up to with a combination of places we were always really interested and excited to see, like the Brooks Range in northern Alaska, this very northernmost mountain range that we had never really traveled through. And so we knew that we wanted to incorporate that. And then we also were drawing on connections to places that we had previously. So there was a place where we built a cabin together earlier in our relationship. There was another site where we had actually built a bark canoe on another wilderness journey. So we wanted to revisit some of these places that we had been to before, as well as linking up new areas we'd never seen. And we started off with a few kind of mandates for ourselves. I guess we wanted it to be human powered. We wanted to have as much wilderness component as we could. So we specifically didn't choose travel on trails or on roads or by bike. We wanted to be moving through places that required us to navigate across the wilderness. So those were some of the elements going into it. And little by little, we started to piece together what a route might look like. And we were also limited by the logistics of it. So how could we get resupplies to ourselves in these remote places? Yeah. And so we shaped some of the communities we traveled through because we use the Postal Service to ship ourselves materials.
So when you do that, do you plan like, okay, we'll probably be at this point on this date, so you ship the package to go there before you even leave type of thing?
Yeah, or we had a big stack of boxes in my parents' basement before leaving with dates written on them of please mail this on X and X date. And we were lucky because we had a little bit of wiggle room. We weren't arranging, with one notable exception that almost went terribly wrong. We weren't needing to meet a plane or be at a specific place, when that package arrived. So we sent everything general delivery, and we just basically had to get ourselves to the community to pick up our resupply. And these are generally very remote, very small communities, but they do all have post offices, whether it's in Alaska or Canada.
Oh, wow. And I'm curious too, with the human powered element, was that like what made you decide to go that route? Is it like an eco decision, or because you're a biologist? Does it tie into that?
I think all of those things that I wouldn't say that I was doing this explicitly to make a statement about the environment, although that's really important to me. And as a bird biologist and a wildlife biologist, I am certainly drawn to the experience of being out among birds and other critters and seeing how they make their way in the world. And so there was a certain appeal to that, is in terms of the big migration questions. But I think a lot of it was just wanting that challenge, the personal challenge of getting ourselves physically from one place to another. And we intentionally chose these different modes of transport, partially because they fit the landscape well. So like Inside Passage, I guess we could have somehow tried to hike it, but using a boat made a lot of sense. Same thing for crossing over the Coast Mountain Range. Skis were necessary for the glaciers, things like that. But then we also had the benefit of never getting bored with any one, whether it was rafting or rowing or skiing. We were always mixing it up, and that was a lot of fun and kept it really interesting and personally challenging, because we had to become experts, if we weren't already, in these different ways of moving.
Yeah, I can't imagine, like, so I'm assuming you're skiing with like your backpack on?
Yes, yeah.
Wow.
Mountaineering equipment and food and all of that. We had done a fair amount of adventuring prior to this trip, but nothing quite on this scale. And
yeah,
was the thing that really was different about this.
And then just one more thing based on like the type of trip. Was there a reason you chose to go off trail? Is that because it's easier to see bird life, or?
Well, in Alaska, they're really, to connect the places we wanted to connect, there aren't trails to begin with. So,
okay.
You have these, it's very different than it is in some parts of North America, where you have these extensive trail networks and you really have to work hard to get off of a trail or off of a road. And that's not the case up here. Things are just much more remote by nature. So there wasn't any trail going where we wanted to. And partially also the wilderness element of it. But yeah, we couldn't have followed a trail even if we wanted to.
Yeah, I love it. So what went into planning and preparing for such a remote and rugged adventure?
A lot of time, a lot of spreadsheets, which is more my domain than Pat's. A lot of looking at maps and dreaming and trying to figure out, how might you get from one mountain range to another, and looking at the topography, looking at Google Earth images, talking to people who had been to some of the places, although again, it wasn't really an established route that anyone else had necessarily done or could give us specific guidance on. So I think it was a lot of research, just trying to figure out what might work, what might not, and then what would be the stopping points. And of course, there's a million things that we would have prepared more had we had more time, but we started close to a year in advance of planning and preparation. There's a lot of just putting oatmeal and trail mix and various food into small bags, and those very menial tasks, but they end up being really critical for the logistics of pulling something like that off. So.
Is there a way, like, it's so funny, you're like talking about, like, most people just look at like a Google map, and then you're like looking at all these different maps. I love it. Is there a way that you know or have an idea of how much food to pack for each stop? Because it's like, you know, I know what I eat on a normal day, but you're doing so much activity that I'm sure you guys needed to eat so much more than you normally would. Or maybe not.
And we've certainly gotten it pretty wrong at other times and other trips. And so we knew that we needed more than, like, for example, there was a trip that we did 10 years prior to that one, our very first formative trip together, where we hiked in and to the headwaters of this northern river and built a bark canoe and then floated out. But at the time I packed, you know, it was like, well, about 2,000 calories per person per day. That's, you know, the federal guidance. It should be good enough for us. And it certainly was not. We were very hungry.
Oh, yeah.
So this time around, I think we operated more on the order of like 4,000 to 4,500 calories per person per day, which translates into about 2 or just over 2 pounds of food per person per day. In total, I think we had something like 1,000 pounds of food, you know, packed and prepared. So it was on a pretty massive scale, and even that piece could be really daunting at times. And so we definitely had to approach the various elements of the trip in the preparations for it, just kind of one task at a time, and just keep plugging away on it. And we did do pretty well with the food this time. There was one time we ran out of food and had a real scare with starvation, but that was the one resupply we had by plane, and the plane wasn't able to get to us. So that was a pretty humbling experience.
Oh my gosh. In terms of what you were packing, I know you mentioned oatmeal. Is it, because I mean, I'm assuming you're not packing like, you know, burgers and stuff, or maybe you are. I've never done something like this, but you know, what kind of food do you pack to be shipped later on?
Yeah, it's got to be long shelf life, because we were packing this stuff months in advance. And when you send things to those different post offices, you can send them general deliveries, so they can sit there for sometimes a month or more.
Yeah, so not hamburgers.
Yeah, basic dried food, fats as much as we could. We vacuum sealed a lot of peanut butter, which, you know, seems like a kind of a silly thing to do, but that was critical, because it's hard to get perishable stuff like cheese and some of the fats. A lot of these really rural communities, they don't have anything like that on their shelves. It's all processed and prepared foods, and people supplement a lot with subsistence food. But yeah, it's much harder to get things that we think of as very basic parts of our diet in these northern communities. So yeah, I would say oatmeal, pasta, couscous, stuff that was easy to pack and easy to cook and quick, but also pack some calories in them. Yeah. Granola bars, nothing super exciting, a lot of nuts, but it all tasted really good when we were working hard. So
yeah, when you're like looking forward to that next meal.
Yeah.
So what were some of the challenges you faced on this expedition, both mentally and physically, and how did you overcome them?
Yeah, we knew going into it that there would be a lot of objective hazard, just in terms of weather and conditions and dealing with bears and things like that. Of course, you can't really anticipate what's going to be a problem when. So I think for me, a big part of the challenge was being open to this idea that we just had to be responsive to whatever presented itself. And sometimes it was dealing with avalanches on steep, snowy slopes, and sometimes it was dealing with a predatory bear. That was luckily only one instance. And then there was also the mental part of continuing day after day, sometimes when things felt extremely hard. Interestingly, the lowest point of the trip for, I think, both of us, certainly for me, was up on the Mackenzie Delta, which is where the Mackenzie River fans into the Arctic Ocean. And it was a place that we knew might have some slow water. We knew there might be some bugs, but it ended up being so mentally challenging. And I think it was the only time that I really wanted to quit. There wasn't a good way out at that time because we were so remote. But it was the mosquitoes, it was the mud, it was just the pure misery of the experience. It wasn't so much the danger or the physical challenge, although, it was challenging. We were paddling a lot of miles every day, but there were certainly other parts of the trip that were much more physically challenging. But I think the mental component, once you start to question, why you're doing what you're doing, by nature, a lot of travel, and particularly this kind of travel, is a bit absurd. And so if you start to question the heart of the trip, then everything else falls apart. So some of those moments, I think, where it was about the physical, but also very much about the mental and the endurance of going on day after day. And we were pushing our bodies pretty hard too. We were covering on average more than 20 miles a day, by different means of transport, obviously, but it was physically hard. And so to somehow find that mental place that allowed us to keep going and allowed me to keep going, even when things hurt, because they always did. And just the endurance component, I think, for anyone who is a runner or a biker or really does, anything that pushes their body, they would be familiar with that sense.
Yeah. And you did it for such a long time. Like, it wasn't just a week or a month. It was, 6 months, correct?
Yeah.
Of doing that almost every day, almost 20 miles a day.
Yeah. Usually 20 or sometimes more. So we were moving, most days we were moving at least 12 hours a day. So they were long days, and movement just started to become a bit of our mantra, I guess, that that was what we did. We moved like animals.
Wow. I did, honestly, a 5-day hike in the Annapurna Himalayas recently. And I don't know how many miles, but it was like 8 hours a day. And I thought it was a lot of uphill. I found that very challenging. So hearing you talk about this, it's like, that is very, 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 very incredible. I'm curious too, how you deal with your feet. Like, is there any type of things you should carry to, take care of blisters, or what if your shoes got wet? Did you have a backup pair? Like, how do you plan for that?
Well, our shoes were never dry, so we got used to that. I don't think I had dry feet for an entire day of the whole trip. So yeah, the dry feet wasn't really an option for us.
That's just getting used to it.
That was just the way it was. I try to tell my kids that now, and they're not buying it, but I think there's actually one product that I didn't know about during the trip, but I've since discovered, and it's amazing. It's called Leukotape, and I think it's just, you can get it in like a medical supply store or online, but it is the best solution for blisters, whether they've already started or if you're trying to prevent them. So that's my one plug for a company that I actually know nothing about, but they make nice foot tape.
That's so important. I feel like if your feet are miserable, it's like you're miserable.
It's completely debilitating too.
Yeah. And you obviously, especially on that, it's not like you're like, oh, I'll just take a taxi instead. Like, you have to have your feet working. So
yeah, very true. Yeah. And I think it was that was one of the things we had to stay on top of constantly. We were lucky not to have any acute injuries, but even just the chronic, using the same body part over and over again, there's a lot of potential for having injuries from that. And the feet were a big deal. So
yeah. And I'm curious too, just based on, because you were just talking about injuries, for a trip like this, is there special insurance that you got in case you had to be maybe airlifted, or, the people helping you would have to go to such a remote place?
Yeah, I don't know what the current policy is, but we did have something. I had regular health insurance, but then we had some supplementary, I can't remember if it was American Alpine Club, or there was one of the outdoor climbing related hubs that offered some kind of supplementary insurance that would, provide for a rescue in that case. But it wasn't any huge and additional, but
it's not like the standard, if you went to Italy type of travel insurance. It's like a next level type of for adventure travel insurance.
Yeah, and I actually think it's probably less expensive, at least the travel insurance that I've used occasionally in the past for international travel, there's the repatriation, there's all these other things that you would consider. I mean, we were in Canada, but it's a little bit different than traveling in a lot of parts of the world.
Yeah.
So yeah, it was a relatively small additional policy that basically just covered if we needed to be medevaced out of somewhere,
Yeah.
you know, that there would be a little bit of additional coverage.
Which I'm sure for a trip like you are doing is so important to have that safety.
Yeah, and you hope not to use it.
Yeah. So what were some of the most rewarding aspects of the expedition?
I think for me it was the ability to do this for such an extended period of time. It really shifted from a trip where you get your head into a different space for a little while, but you always have nagging that all these work things or whatever else that you're needing to return to. And for us, we were way past that point, and it really had become a lifestyle more than just a trip. And being able to remove myself from the constant inundation that we're all faced with of phone dinging and work emails and just a lot that we're is always around us. And so to be removed from that for a period of time was really rewarding. I think as part of that too, what I took away from it was, because there's so much uncertainty in traveling in the wilderness, that was something that I felt like carried through into my day-to-day life, even beyond the trip. The wildlife component was a huge part of the rewarding aspect as a biologist, and particularly bird biologist, being able to witness birds on their migration. And we had a really incredible experience with a caribou herd up in the Western Arctic. And we essentially were embedded in their migration for hours. They were crossing a river that we were paddling down, and we pulled to the side to watch them. And soon the caribou came from behind us and were surrounding us for hours and hours and hours. And to get to watch these animals doing what they do in this mass movement of migration was really powerful experience. We had also been following caribou trails for so much of our trip up in the Arctic, because they know best how to get from one place to another when they're in the mountains and in the tundra. And so to have gone from following their tracks to actually being a part of their movement was really incredible.
Oh my gosh, that's amazing. I was just thinking of something and now I totally forgot. Oh, how you were saying, like, about the immersiveness of it and being disconnected. I feel like that's something people always want when they travel. But sometimes, I mean, even myself, like some trips I go on, I feel like there has been some growth or maybe some change or like something transformative or noteworthy has happened. And then other trips I kind of go away and I'm like, I just kind of like saw the sights. So there's like those two different types of trips. But I think most people hope at some point they'll have that kind of transformative feeling on a trip where they have this experience of growth. And maybe it's even just like a mindset shift or something, but like to be able to allow travel to help you have that change is such an incredible feeling.
Yeah, absolutely. And even connection to other people, it was very much a wilderness trip. So we weren't necessarily encountering people all that much. And obviously we were far from our families, but I did feel this much deeper sense of connection with the people I love. I think in part because I had that mental space to think about those relationships and to really value them, and wasn't just caught up in the busybody situation. We all face so much of the time. So I think, that sometimes we need to be forced to reimagine our priorities and our goals and our dreams, and travel can be a really great way to do that.
Did you feel too, because especially since you were gone for so long and like living such a different way of life, when you came back, was it sort of like culture shock or like, reverse culture shock, or even like, all right, how do I go back to checking emails now that I just was in the wilderness for 6 months? Or did you sort of give yourself space to just slowly get back into that?
We had a little space for that. We have a remote place that we built a number of years ago together, and we were able to go there for a little while, but it was the whole experience of coming back was pretty disorienting. And I think I knew that would be the case. Transitions are always hard, but to have such a dramatic transition, I knew that it wouldn't be a smooth, just jump right back into what we left behind. So I was dealing with a lot of questions and a lot of uncertainty about what is it that I want? We can't just keep tromping through the wilderness forever. But then when you start to realign your priorities and think, okay, well, what matters more, that somebody needs me to respond to them in the next 45 seconds, or the fact that these birds are traveling thousands of miles on their mass migrations? And I think just trying to figure out where in that space our lives would shake out was a challenge.
Yeah. And I think too, like even on a smaller scale, I think about that too with just like work tasks. Like,
Mm-hmm.
oh, people say you should meditate and you should visualize and all this stuff. And you're like, okay, I know I should do that, but I also need to get things done. So you're
Yeah.
like just banging out tasks when really like, actually just published a video yesterday on my morning routine. I feel like having a morning routine, and some mornings I honestly, don't find the space to do it. But when I do, it's like, how am I not doing this all the time? It's like
Yeah.
you end up being a better version of yourself and more productive and more clear. But it's just hard to remember that sometimes because you're
Mm-hmm.
like, I have so much to do.
Yeah, definitely. And I think that that's true with leaving on a trip as well. It always feels so impossible because there's so much to do. But the reality is that those to-do lists are never going to shrink. I mean, at least not in my life. I feel
Oh,
like they just
yeah.
grow longer and longer. And then I come back sometimes from an experience like that and realize that nothing has really changed and the world certainly didn't fall apart because I didn't check all of my emails or whatever it is I needed to do.
Yeah.
So yeah, carving out that space. And for me now with young children, I find I absolutely have to do that. For me to be physical is really important, running or hiking or skiing or whatever it is. And there will always be lots of distractions and reasons why we shouldn't, but like you said, it makes you a better version of yourself, and for me, a better parent and a happier person. So
Yeah. And more rejuvenated, like just overall, I
yeah.
think. Um, so, we were talking a little bit about the physical dangers and, you expected some of those, the pursuit from bears, the near starvation, like you were saying, the mosquitoes. But, what you hadn't expected were maybe some of the doubts and reevaluations that had entered your mind. So, what was it like unpacking and processing all of these thoughts that were coming into your mind while you were doing this journey?
Well, the nice thing about walking or skiing or rowing or any of those activities is that there's this sort of rhythmic, almost meditative state that I think comes with it. And I know I'm on a trip and fully there when my brain starts going into that stream of consciousness state. And of course, it's not always there, but it is a really good processing tool, I think. And again, it's that idea of the mental space that we need to do those things. And the physical act of moving is, for me, a really good way to come to that. So yeah, I think there were definitely moments where I wouldn't say I was in a state of panic, but where I felt really like, oh my gosh, what am I going to do about coming back? And what about my job? And do I want to have kids? And, I think about my dad and what he was dealing with and what that might look like for our family. And, but then it was just a much easier way to try to work through those thoughts and experiences because I did have the space to do that. And, doing this trip with another person, and fortunately, Pat and I get along well, and that we really thrive in those kinds of challenging situations, especially when we have such a shared sense of purpose that, being able to talk about all of those elements too with another person was really helpful.
Yeah. I feel like too when I'm hiking, it's like all of a sudden you just feel like you can just talk for so long about things that, at home. It's like my fiance and I eat dinner together and then we try to be better about watching TV. But like there was a point in our relationship where I was like, we haven't spoken, I don't think, in like a couple weeks because we would just watch so much TV. We would eat while watching TV. And then we kind of stopped doing that because I'm like, I don't think we've spoken really. And like we've been
Yeah,
physically near each other. But yeah, when you just like don't have the distractions, you're outside, it's just kind of comes out and it's nice.
yeah, yeah, I agree.
So for others who would like to have a similar journey, maybe not as rugged or remote, but just using nature to discover their sense of purpose or maybe have some self growth, what advice would you give in terms of choosing a trip?
I would say that I think for a lot of people, it can be really intimidating to go outdoors if it's not an environment they're really comfortable in. So I would say start small, that just giving yourself the opportunity to, if a hike is something that is really new and different, then start there. If doing an overnight camping trip is new and different, then start there, without being afraid of dreaming really big. But I think there can be a danger in thinking too big to start with, because then it's all very intimidating and maybe people don't do it at all. But I think taking the time to go outside and look around, and like for me, birds are one way into that, that you can look at your ordinary birds at your ordinary bird feeder and think about the incredible ways that they survive, and whether for us in Alaska, we're starting to just have the birds that spend their winters up here, but in many ways that's a more impressive feat than these long distance migrants where these birds are having to survive in such extreme conditions. And so I think sometimes just taking a moment out of your day to think about some aspect of being outdoors or the natural world can be a really productive way to start, and then start dreaming up. I think another piece of it is finding other people in your life, and sometimes that means going outside of your immediate circles, who want to share that kind of experience and are also interested. So taking it on together.
Yeah. Have you do you have any, I know you live in Alaska, so maybe there's more people who are into the remote outdoors.
Mm-hmm.
Do you have any groups or any online, whether online or offline, like a meetup group, a Facebook group, where you find there are a lot of people who are really into the outdoors or nature travel?
I think there's a ton of them. I don't use a lot of them just because I do have a pretty big community of people who like to do similar things.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't have specific references, and some of the ones that I am more familiar with are probably place-based, so more based
Like
in
Alaska specific. Yeah.
Yeah, I know there's a lot of Facebook groups. There's tons of blogs you can follow, and you probably know more about a lot of those than I do. But that I think the online community, while not getting too sucked into spending all of your time, being glued to the phone or whatever, but it can be a great way to meet other people who like to do similar things or are interested at least.
Yeah, I know at least in New York City, there's so many meetup groups, and a lot of them will do, like a lot of the outdoors ones will do weekend hikes and
Mm-hmm.
things like that, and even finding outdoor adventure in the city. So, yeah, I think that's a good resource, at least in New York. And I think meetups all over the place. So that could be a good one.
Yeah. And I would say many of my closest friends have come about because I was in a new place and I needed somebody who wanted to go running with me or do whatever. And then, those kinds of experiences often lead to really great friendships.
Yeah, that is really nice. So in terms of getting into the mindset for a major transformation through travel, how can someone mentally prepare to both face all of the thoughts that will come into their mind, as well as use them to have a transformation versus just simply like brushing them off?
Yeah, I think the openness is key, which is often hard to come to when it's something new and different and intimidating. But just having the idea that the experiences you're going to face are probably not what you're anticipating, and being okay with that. And that's not always my strong suit. I tend to be a planner, and I like to know what's coming, and I make lots of lists for myself and things. And I think that the trip that we took, that particularly really long one, that did allow me to embrace that sense of uncertainty, and to trust that when things got hard, that often that meant that something really good was going to follow. So I think somehow getting into that state of mind that many things do come full circle, not to sound overly cheesy about it or that everything works out in the end, but that I think often when we're open to the new experiences, that's when we also grow ourselves the most notably. And sometimes the experiences are not exactly what we want. And other times they're, far and beyond what we could have ever dreamed of.
Yeah. And I think too, like a lot of people always say, oh, get out of your comfort zone. But it is true. Like I can think of a lot of travel experiences I've had where in the moment I was maybe uncomfortable, or I was like, do I actually like this? But then afterwards, you're so grateful for having to have gotten the chance to experience that. So just being able to sort of roll with it and be like, okay, let's just see how this plays out.
Yeah, and I mean, you don't obviously want to be terribly naive and get yourself into trouble, but another
Yeah,
thing,
no, not unsafe, just uncomfortable.
yeah, oh, uncomfortable is key, but I think that, I've also walked away with the experience that most people are much kinder and more generous than we will give them credit for, and I think that often putting yourself into a situation that's a little bit uncomfortable, and for us that, might have been in a really remote setting, but that people went out of their way to help us and to be kind, and it renewed my faith in humanity as well. So I think that can be another bonus of travel.
It's another highlight. Oh,
That,
yeah, that is true too, especially, as we all say all the time, like the news is so depressing and you feel
yeah,
like everyone's just terrible but I mean, there's obviously bad things happening, but the world isn't as terrible as it seems, especially when you go out and you start to meet people and maybe you had a preconceived notion about a place or the people that live there and then you realize like, okay, that wasn't exactly totally accurate. Like people here are actually really nice and I feel welcome and all that kind of stuff.
mm-hmm. Yeah, and just individuals are not the same as the news. So
Yeah. And getting to see that for yourself too, instead of even if you hear from someone else like, oh no, the people there are really great or this place is really great, but getting to like go there and just experience it for yourself, I think is, can have a transformative effect as well.
yeah, agreed.
So, just to end, what advice would you give to others who are considering maybe quitting their job or hitting pause on their career, but are afraid to take the leap and go travel?
Because it comes back to what we were talking about before, that there's never a right time, and I have so far in my life never regretted going. I've only regretted not going, and I think, yeah, that obviously you have to weigh all the different factors that um, might go into making a decision like that, and not everyone has the luxury of choice to that degree anyway. But I think that the idea that you will not regret going, but I talk to a lot of older people in the context of the book or the trip who say, oh, I always dreamed of going to this place, or always dreamed of doing an adventure like that, or I always wanted to learn how to ski, or whatever it is. And I think that regret is not something you can ever take back.
Yeah.
So making the choice to guess make that leap is not an easy one, but I think so rarely do we wish that we hadn't, because the experience is almost always above and beyond what we could have ever hoped for. So
Yeah. I know I think of it too as like I've sent a lot of emails to my community like you don't want to wonder what if, because
yeah,
that terrifies me actually, like wanting something really badly and then not doing it and then wondering like, especially in older age when maybe it's not possible, like, oh, what if I would have done that? Oh, I hate that thought of having to think that way. I'd rather do something and hate it. Or even when you're on a trip and something like I've been bungee jumping a few times. It's not
mhm.
something I'm like, oh, I love doing it, but I'm always like, oh, if I don't do it, I'm gonna have to hear about it from my friends. I'm gonna wonder what it was like. So like if something's presented to me, I sort of am like, I just need to try this. Just to
Yeah,
like just to know what it was like and know that I did it and I didn't pass anything up that was like a possibility.
right. And if you have a terrible experience, you will also grow from that. So
Yeah, exactly. Amazing. So thank you so much for taking the time just to actually end. I'd love to know, just let everyone know where they can find you and also about your amazing book that is out. Where can they find that and, the title, what it's about?
sure. Yeah. So the book is called The Sun is a Compass, a 4,000-mile journey into the Alaskan wilds. And you can buy it just about anywhere that you would purchase books. So online, big booksellers, Amazon, etc. Hopefully in many of your local bookstores. And yeah, it shouldn't be hard to find. So Sun is a Compass. And you can find me online at carolinevanhemert.com is my website. And I'm also on Instagram at Sun as a Compass, and Facebook, although a bit less. So yeah, I would love to see anybody and happy to answer questions, and hope you get a chance to check out the book.
Awesome, awesome. And I'll be embedding this video into a blog post that I'll be publishing and sharing. And I will also, once this ends, put links to Caroline's channels and book in the comments of this video.
Excellent.
Amazing. Well, thank you so
Thank
much for taking the time. It was amazing talking to you and hearing all about your journey. I have a craving to go hiking right now.
you. Yeah, my pleasure. It was nice to talk with you. Thanks so much.
Yeah, enjoy the rest of your day.
Thanks, you too. Bye bye.